morning and welcome to this week's edition of Tourismus Namibia, our Saturday morning broadcast that we have ready for you each Saturday morning, obviously. My name, as you can see there on the screen, is Frank Steffen. I'm the editor of Tourismus Namibia magazine and the German magazine Allgemeine Zeitung. Welcome, as said. I hope we can entertain you with a couple of news, and obviously we would like to bring you a couple of destinations, and then at the end we also have a very interesting interview this week. So first and foremost, topics. Let's go there next, but let's just quickly have a look at the marketplace. Welcome back, and like I said, we've got a couple of topics ready for you. I think one of the more important ones, especially now that Namibia is battling with COVID once again, and it's becoming quite serious. So for that reason, we've got quite stringent new rules applying, especially to the center of the country. Nevertheless, I mean, even this will go over once again. It did so last year. So this week they had a big conference in Windhoek before the new sort of rules came into effect, and it was part of the World Tourism Organization, which is obviously part of the United Nations, and people like the president, Dr. Hage Geingob, but also the head of that organization. It is in short UNWTO. And the head is Mr. Zurab Pololikashvili. You might remember that he visited Namibia last year, and was quite interesting to see that he was quite impressed with what he saw in Namibia, and that's why he said he'll be back, and he certainly was true to his word. So a big conference in Windhoek, and the idea was to establish Africa as a tourism brand. And one of the journalists of Allgemeine Zeitung, Steffi Balzer, actually watched the whole thing and actually was present at the conference. So have a look at what she gave us as video clips to show you.
Namibia's tourism industry plays a critical role in the country's economy, acting as a catalyst for prosperity and growth. Thus, it is befitting that Namibia was chosen as the host for United Nations World Tourism Organization Africa Regional Conference themed Strengthening Brand Africa for Swift Recovery of the Tourism. I cannot see. Maybe. According to the United Nations, tourism employs 1 in every 10 people on Earth and provides livelihoods to hundreds of millions more. For many developed and developing countries, the tourism sector is a major source of employment, government revenue, and foreign exchange earnings. Without this vital lifeline, many countries are experiencing a dramatic contraction in gross domestic product and a rise in unemployment, and Namibia is no exception. Tourism, therefore, continues to be one of the sectors hardest hit by the pandemic, and the outlook remains highly uncertain. Since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic in March 2020, the world witnessed a 96% reduction in travel as many member states decided to close their borders. These measures have had consequences beyond the tourism economy, with many other sectors that support and are supported by tourism significantly impacted. Even though the encouraging news regarding the development of COVID vaccines has boosted hopes for a recovery of tourism business and travel, challenges persist, with the sector expected to experience negative zero growth until well into 2022. Domestic tourism can only partially compensate for the loss of inbound tourism. Real recovery will only be possible when international tourism returns to pre-COVID-19 levels. In this regard, the effective implementation of a new UN WTO agenda for Africa 2030, the tourism for inclusive growth is more pertinent than ever. Taking this into account, it is of paramount importance that we develop coherent and comprehensive approaches to tourism policy making. At this juncture, it is necessary that I emphasize the importance of collectively branding our continent and establishing it as a premier destination, not only for leisure travel, but business travel as well. Thus, we need to be fully committed to advocating the brand Africa, which is one of the priorities of the UN WTO agenda for Africa. To achieve this, we need to use our media platforms to showcase and celebrate African capabilities. Innovation face numerous challenges. I believe that we have the capacity to emerge from this crisis with a more robust and resilient tourism sector that will play an integral role in driving Africa's economic development.
So I'm very happy that it's happening in Namibia. Namibia is one of the leading tourism destinations, not only on the African continent, and it's a pleasure, it's an honor to have you with us, and under your leadership, as we promised, we are here. We had a visit in November, now we are here. I want personally thank to each minister and delegations who arrived here from after so many barriers, which unfortunately in tourism sector all we have. I'm sure that this is another part of our job, and we agreed and we are working on the harmonized protocols, which is very important today, to don't confuse people and tourists how to travel tomorrow from Gambia to Namibia, from Namibia to Paris, from Paris to New York. So this is another challenge, and we are working on that. But today we are here to find the best solutions and best way how to promote Africa and to be ready. I'm sure that this pandemic will end one nice day, and we have to be ready for that day, and to don't make mistakes we made before. I wouldn't call it mistakes. This is a future, and Africa has a future to attract more and more tourists. I always say that 84 million tourists, these are the number. African continent received is nothing, it's zero. And easily it's possible to double these numbers in a very short period, even in 2 or 3 years. Of course, we need patience, we need a lot of work. One of the parties promote well and right way African continent and African destinations. Of course, connectivity is another very important part of our job, and security and sanitary security, it became, of course, top one priority for all of us.
Yeah, as explained before, the idea is obviously to promote Africa as a tourism brand, and specifically we as Namibia obviously feature as part of that. Unfortunately, Namibia has gone down a bit in terms of rankings internationally. And one of the takeaways from that conference for Namibia was that it becomes increasingly important to not only promote yourself in magazines and by just giving good service and whatever else you do, but to also promote yourself on the internet, and especially invite visitors to actually review your place. The downside is obviously that you might lose a bit if your service is not up to scratch, but the upside is certainly that people these days Google every country there is before deciding to actually go there on a visit. Right, and then we had another contribution by Erwin Leuschner. He at the coast wrote a bit about the fly-in gathering that has been conducted over the years. Some of you might remember that they always had all these pilots coming together at Rostock. We're now talking down in the at the Gulp River and so on. And then for the past year, actually 2 years ago, they moved to Uys, which is close to the Brandberg, which you see in the back there. And the idea is it's a bit of game playing and sports and all types of entertainment where these guys come together and see how good they are as pilots and aviation experts and so on. So it's a lot of fun. It's family fun to a large extent. And it's always a lot of excitement. So this year, for the first time, it was conducted at Uys again, because last year they couldn't have a gathering like that. Right, and then very interesting during the past week, I would think very important actually, is the Standing Parliamentary Committee for Natural Resources came together, and here in the brown coat you see the previous Minister of Information for Namibia, Chikero Twea. He's now head of that subcommittee. And they were lending an ear to SOL, which is saving our unique life in Okavango. And the idea was really that the people came together and were able to, for the first time, present why they, as a public interest group, are not convinced that it is a good idea to have any oil drilling up in the Kavango areas. And so you had people like Matthew Totten Jr., who made a very logical case of why he thinks this cannot work. And if I would advise you to, instead of just listening to this show, to maybe look at the Allgemeine Zeitung. You can probably look up the everything that has to do with Recon Africa, and simply translate it with Google. That's not a problem these days, because it's a really long story. And the bottom line is really that the way that it was approached, as well as the first indications of what is available up in that area, would seem to indicate that Recon Africa #1 approached the whole project in a very not untypical fashion, really. And #2, that the indicators that are there would not typically allow them to arrive at the fast conclusions that they've arrived at in terms of finding oil. And Matt Totten actually explains well why that is the case. And I think it was a bit of an eye-opener for some of the parliamentarians, especially because you had other interest people, and there were representatives from the San women, in other words, Bushman folk, that explained that they had never been asked about this whole project. They'd never been informed. There was also Ms. Masutua, who quickly explained that she does not agree that that a company like Recon Africa is allowed to simply go in there, to take up land and start drilling for oil without really getting the local folk involved. And as she so rightly put it, and we've spoken about it a lot on the show, is there's no real inclusion of the local folk. They were not asked, and she cannot really see how this thing in the long run will bring any economical benefit to the people up there, quite apart from the fact that no water permits existed, even though these guys were carrying on with what they're doing. Now, what worries me a bit, I obviously see all these presentations and they make sense and the arguments seem correct and so on, but what worries me is when somebody like Chikero Tuea then announces that he's not sure that this will be a fast process because he intends hearing each and every person. So I think there's a hidden message behind that. You know what, we'll listen to you for the next 2 years if it depends on that. But in the meantime, these guys are still carrying on with their drilling operations. So this is a good and a bad news item. Right, up next we've got angling. The angling permits in Namibia will not be issued on weekends anymore. So this is just a short note, but I know that many South Africans come here and they would like to go out and do their angling. So it is still easy to get your angling permit. That's not the problem, but you need to do it during the week. So if you arrive on a weekend and you would like to go and do some angling on a Sunday morning, you better make sure that you've got your permit in advance, which you can obviously also organize even in Windhoek as you pass through. So that's just a short note. Yeah, and those were our topics for today. Up next, we've got destinations. Yeah, welcome back once again, and destinations. Staying true to what we promised in the previous shows, and what we did last week for the first time was we asked our colleagues in the outside rural areas to tell us a bit more about the lodges and guest houses and whatever establishments they've got, instead of always me trying to find a new idea for you. So this week we have Elizabeth Joseph, and she reported about the Schützenhaus. Now the Schützenhaus, as you can see there, it's the red dot there, right at the bottom, is towards the southern end of the center of Keetmans. So you've got Kroonline on the right-hand side, the industrial areas further on the side there. But the old Keetmans, which is in the loop of that railway line, that's really where the Schützenhaus is found. It's a very old building, and it was established in 1907 as the oldest German club in Southern Africa, in fact. So they've modernized a lot in the recent years, and well, for a while already, and Ingo Klitzke is running that place, and I must say I've stayed there a couple of times, and it's a very nice place. Obviously he has a lot of German history, being a German club, and shows the history of what the Germans did down there in the south. As you can see, in the hot summers, and they do get hot down there, you actually have the benefit of a pool as well, and you've got decent rooms. Like I said, I've stayed there before.
Good afternoon. Yes, it is with great regret that I have to announce that the forthcoming or the promised help from government via the Social Security Commission has not realized to its fullest effect. We indeed received the originally promised 3 months pay for our employees, but the 1% on our gross wages never materialized, putting us in great danger. We have had to sustain our income through loans from the bank, and from investment companies otherwise. So I'm actually a bit unhappy about it all, but we've managed to keep going. But if we have another lockdown, which seems to be imminent, I think that we'll have great difficulties in coming over that mountain. So, but thank you very much for everybody who's been involved and for everybody who's been supporting us through these difficult times. Thank you very much.
Face and feel nothing double.
Dit is stunning.
Right, the Schützenhaus. It's a typical place in the south which you could use as an ideal stopover or even as a base, because it is really in the center of, it's close to the Mesosaurus fossil trail. It's very close to the Quiver Tree Forest. From there you can go down to the Fish River Canyon. And well, we all know about that. I mean, we've written and told you quite a number of times about that whole area. I mean, it starts with the canyon itself, all the various viewpoints, plus there are other lodges down there, and you obviously can go down to Ice. For that matter, you can even do the hiking trail. So Keetmans always seems to be one of those places where you think you just need to stop and just quickly put some petrol in your vehicle. No, actually it is quite interesting. And if you plan your trip properly, you can take that as an ideal sort of base from where to do a couple of activities. Right, and they've got something like, by the way, 26 rooms, and Wi-Fi is no problem. They've got a restaurant and whatever. So like I said, it's actually a very nice place to stay. And as I said before, I've stayed there, so I know that I'm not talking nonsense. Right, and then we have another one from Ester Kamati. Ester is one of our colleagues situated or posted in Otjiwarongo, and she told us more about the Hadassah guest house. So the Hadassah is that road which you see at the bottom on the right hand side is as you come from Windhoek or Okahandja for that matter. So it's immediately as you enter town on the right hand side. And it's an ideal place, once again, that you can visit if you would like to stop over for a night or even for a day, because make no mistake, Otjiwarongo, once again, similar to like many of these smaller towns that we have, they still have interesting aspects which you might like to visit, whether that be the Crocodile Park, which is in town, and then from there it actually isn't not that far up to Uchu and onto Etosha, or you could even go from there onwards to Etosha via Tsumeb. So that doesn't really matter there. The Brandberg Park is very close, so if it is booked out or you've decided you would rather enjoy a bit more luxury in the town itself, then obviously this is one of the places where you can stay. And please note, we don't always just talk about these things from the point of view of a tourist coming from overseas or just you being a tourist, but more often than not, it's quite nice to stay in these places when you have a business trip or when you just need to meet up with family or whatever it is. So, and like I said, it's an ideal mid-stop up to the north. especially now that the road is also being finished from Gobabis directly up to Grootfontein. You can typically, instead of driving over Windhoek, you might want to do it a bit different, go with that road up towards Grootfontein, but instead of going to Grootfontein, you turn left halfway and you go to Akakarara. And Akakarara is obviously one of the main centers of the Oshiherero folk. And actually I should say Ovaherero folk, because Oshiherero is their language. And so once you're there, you're close to Waterberg and all those places. So there's really much to do there, because remember, Waterberg is one of the few places where we've got, not few, it's the only place where we've got buffaloes, African buffaloes, outside or below the red veterinary line. So in other words, normally buffaloes are only found in Kavango and going up towards Katima. But generally in Namibia itself, you only find them in the center of the country at Brandberg, because there's obviously always the big risk of foot-and-mouth disease, and that's where they can contain that more easily. So yeah, that was the Hadassah guest house. That brings us to the end of our destinations today. Up next, we've got To the Point.
If you're feeling, I'm feeling, and you know I won't stop. All we gotta do is take our love to the top. If I got it and you want it, and you'll never let it drop. All we gotta do is take our love to the top. I will ride for you, baby, even die for you. When I'm loving you, but my heart don't stop.
Yeah, this is totally up my alley. We were contacted a while ago by Theunis Keulder, and he is of Shipwreck, or actually of Sandwich Harbour 4x4, and he started with 2 new routes. He would like to get the whole tourism thing going up, and improving again at the coast. So what he does, he's got a day excursion now, which he markets as Shipwreck Sandwich Harbour excursion. And it's replacing our full day Sandwich Harbour excursion, which they had in the past. And then the one that I really like is a 3-day excursion, and they call it Shipwrecks and Diamond Camps. Now, we've written and told you about it many times. These desert trips are just something special. And Erwin Leuschner was fortunate enough to actually join them on one of those trips, and he obviously also organized for one of his colleagues, Leandria Lowe, to speak to Theunis. So have a look at yourself.
Theunis, your company recently launched a Shipwrecks and Diamonds excursion, a 3-day excursion. Please tell us where the idea came about.
Yeah, the idea came about simply because this is a fairly inaccessible area, and it's laden with history around the diamond, beginning of the diamond mining and the period where diamonds were mined in this area, in this period. And with that, there are our skeleton coast. There's a lot of shipwrecks, most of which are gone by now.
Yes.
But there are a few left, and we want to make that accessible to tourists and bring them here with our vehicles and show them the mystery that is Skeleton Coast, and the mystery of the diamond. Early diamond mining in this area, and the mystery of the shipwrecks and the whole history.
Yeah, no, there's definitely mystery. Now, Theunis, just walk us through, how does the 3-day excursion go about?
All right, we leave Swakopmund on the morning of the first day, drive south along the beach. Our first stop is at Sandwich Harbour.
Yes.
Which is a spectacular site in itself. We continue further south all along the beach to the first shipwreck, which is the Shawnee.
Yes.
And from there we go further south. We pass Conception Bay, and we end up at Meop, and we overnight at the Namab camp at Meop. in a tented camp. On the morning of the second day, we drive northwards. We visit Meo Bay, which is the area that we're in here right now, with a rich history of the whaling that has happened in Hollenberg Island, of which we see all the evidence here, all the whale bones. We visit Meo Bay, and we look at the rowing boats with which people were transferred from the sea to the shore, and goods were transferred from the sea to the shore, and then the infrastructure that was here at Meo Bay. From here we then proceed to the diamond camps, Charlottenfelder and Grillenberger. We visit the history there. We return back in the afternoon, have a nice sundowner on one of with oysters and champagne on one of the dunes. And then we go back to the Namib camp. We overnight there again. And on the third day, we head back to Walfish Bay, Swakopmund. On the way, we visit the Edward Bourne shipwreck and that Conception Water, which was the customs area for people who arrived here by ship at the beginning of the last century. And fresh water was also pumped from there to the diamond camps.
Yes.
We give the option of adding another day that we have done on this trip now, where we go to the area south of Meo, and we visit a wonderful little bay called Afklim Bay.
Yeah. I understood you also gave that name, the locals here also gave that name itself.
I'm not 100% sure where the name comes from, but it's really where people get out of their, get off and have a look because it's so spectacular. And then there's always a lot of opportunity for photography, because it's a very, very unique and untouched area. There's no tracks, or very few tracks. There's the footprint, the people footprint is extremely low. So there's some marvelous photography to be done, which we then aim to do if the demand is there, that we leave very early in the morning, or go somewhere late in the afternoons to catch the sunset, that we can do that.
Yeah.
Because there are some spectacular motifs here for photography.
And now, speaking of the human footprint, I understand that only certain concession holders have access to this area. Can you please explain that part for us?
Yes, that's right. Government, firstly, this being still part of the Sperrgebiet, and then also of the Namib Naukluft Park. Obviously, the access is very, very minutely and closely regulated by the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism. So it's only the ministry only gives us out few concessions to operators who are allowed to bring people and vehicles into this area. And that's also severely limited.
Yes.
So it's not as if we can bring loads and loads and loads of people here.
Yeah.
So it's all very, very, very exclusive. So people doing this tour, we are now the first to have packaged a tour for tourism. This area was mostly accessible then for self-drive tourists, or people who took part in self-drive tours. So they had to bring their own vehicles. They need to do all the driving themselves. Yes. And we are now the first one who have put first company who have put a product together where we can offer this for tourists who come to Namibia, but who would otherwise have no way to be able to see this area.
Yeah,
we drive with them in our vehicles. We do everything for them. They basically just have to bring their bag with clothes and themselves and the cameras, and there they go.
They're good to go. How can the people get in contact with you?
Well, they can contact our office, our company, Sandwich Harbour 4x4. We run these trips under Sandwich Harbour 4x4. But also our other company, our sister company, Catamaran Charters, can also be contacted. So we can, or otherwise through our website, we also accept online bookings through our websites. So they can contact us, and obviously we've talked now about tourists, but these trips that we do, these tours that we do, obviously are also accessible for locals.
Yes.
Because we also have local people who want to see these areas, but they don't necessarily want to do the dune driving themselves or the driving themselves, or they might not have 4x4 vehicles. So we make it accessible to those people as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Theunis.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah, a bit of deja vu for me. I've done those tours twice, and I did the self-drive tours, but I would agree with Theunis there. It would be so nice for many more Namibians being able to see that area, because it's very impressive. I mean, I could almost comment each and every picture that they took there. But what strikes me is the first time I went there was more than 15 years ago, and the Shawnee, which you see, that old fishing boat that's sort of in the middle of the water there, at that stage, my children and I, we stood on the back of that boat, and we could only stand on that part because that was the only part protruding from the sand dunes. The sand dunes had covered the whole boat right up to the end of it. So the water was not even close to that boat. And so there are many other stories which one could ponder. And, you know, for example, the water pipe that they were photographing, or actually taking up on the video there, that pipe is a steel pipe that is almost in perfect working order, except for its connections, and it has been there since the 1920s, so it's incredible. It's 100 years old and it's still holding out. I mean, you can see the Edward Ball in that big ship. It's yeah, bit by bit it's disappearing, but it's quite crazy on the one hand to see how long the human impact remains on those areas, and on the other hand how with the biggest of patience, nature is claiming back what is hers. And so very interesting rides, and so much to see. Lots of seals. You will see jackal coming quite close to the camps at night, and if you're lucky, you will even see a couple of gemsbuck or springbuck. This picture, which you see as the background picture today, by the way, is closer as you go down towards Sossusvlei. But anyway, this was our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it a bit, and maybe you want to make use of that opportunity to not drive into the dunes yourself, but rather be driven and you know, make sure that you're safe, and it's an experience of a lifetime. That's all I can say. So thank you for watching today. I hope you have a good weekend, and please make sure you remain healthy, especially if you're a Namibian. Guys, get vaccinated. It's the only way how we can get out of this. It's the only way how we will revive our tourists, because they will only come here if they know they're safe. And they're only safe if all of us have been vaccinated. So keep well. Until next week, see you then.